The night he lost everything, no one clapped. No one noticed. No dramatic music played in the background of his collapse. The bank email arrived at 2:17 a.m. Loan rejected. Credit line frozen. Investors withdrawing. By sunrise, the company he had spent 6 years building was functionally dead. Failure is loud in your head and silent in the world. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at the spreadsheet that had once promised freedom. Every projection he believed in now looked like fiction. Revenue forecasts mocked him. Growth curves felt like lies. He wasn't broke yet, but he was about to be. And what terrified him most wasn't the money, it was the identity. For years, he had introduced himself as a founder, a builder, a rising name in financial circles. Panels, podcasts, networking dinners. He played the role well. Success had begun attaching to his name like a shadow. Now that shadow was disappearing, and he didn't know who he was without it. Most people think failure is the opposite of success. He would soon learn it is something far more dangerous. Failure is exposure. Within weeks, vendors demanded payment. Employees quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles. One by one, team members he once called family took safer jobs. He couldn't blame them. Stability feeds loyalty, risk feeds admiration, but collapse feeds survival instinct. The day he officially shut down operations, he didn't cry, he calculated. How much debt remained, what assets could be liquidated, how long he could survive without income. That instinct, calculation under pressure, was the first sign that something inside him hadn't broken. It had sharpened. The media didn't cover his fall. He wasn't famous enough for headlines, but inside his industry, whispers spread fast. He scaled too quickly. He over-leveraged. He thought he was smarter than the market. Maybe all of it was true, but during the quiet weeks that followed, he reviewed every decision line by line, not emotionally, mechanically. He noticed something strange. The business model wasn't flawed, the timing was. He had built for efficiency in a market that suddenly rewarded liquidity. When conditions shifted, his structure couldn't breathe. He had optimized for growth, but ignored resilience. Growth is seductive, resilience is boring, and boring rarely gets applause. That realization changed everything. Instead of rushing to launch another startup, he did something unexpected. He studied failure. Not motivational quotes, not inspirational comeback stories, actual balance sheets of collapsed companies, bankruptcy filings, debt structures, cash flow breakdowns, interest rate exposures, psychological patterns of founders before collapse. He treated his own failure like a case study. Then he asked a dangerous question. What if failure isn't something to avoid? What if it's something to weaponize? Most entrepreneurs spend their lives trying to eliminate risk. He began mapping how risk behaves. He noticed that failure always reveals pressure points, weak leverage positions, overconfidence zones, dependency chains, psychological blind spots. In other words, failure exposes structural truth, and truth is valuable, very valuable. 6 months after losing everything, he had no company, no team, no office, but he had data. Data most successful founders never gather because they never collapse publicly. He knew exactly where optimism distorts judgment. He knew exactly how lenders tighten during uncertainty. He knew how investors panic before numbers justified panic. He had seen the underbelly of capital. That knowledge was uncomfortable, but it was powerful. He took a consulting contract quietly, advising a mid-sized firm struggling with cash flow volatility. They expected strategic guidance. What they received was surgical restructuring. He identified hidden leverage risks within hours, flagged expansion plans that would collapse under minor market stress, proposed liquidity buffers that reduced projected profit margins short-term but protected long-term survival. The CEO resisted at first. "Growth will slow," he argued. "Yes," he replied calmly, "but you'll still exist in 5 years." The firm implemented half his recommendations. Within a year, the market tightened again. Competitors folded. They didn't. Word spread. He wasn't known as the visionary. He became known as the stabilizer. The man who had failed and learned exactly how failure unfolds now understood fragility better than anyone still riding success waves. He stopped chasing headlines. He started building insurance against collapse. His next venture wasn't flashy, no grand launch event, no aggressive press campaign. It was structured around one principle: exploit fragility. He built financial tools designed not for boom times, but for downturns, advisory systems that helped companies identify hidden failure points before they exploded, investment strategies that prioritized asymmetric downside protection. People thought he had become conservative. He hadn't. He had become strategic. Because once you understand how failure destroys you, you can design structures that benefit when others ignore those warning signs. 3 years after his collapse, something unexpected happened. He wasn't just stable, he was profitable, massively. Not from hype, from discipline. The same investors who once withdrew now approached cautiously. This time he negotiated differently. No over-leverage, no dependency capital, no valuation games disconnected from cash flow reality. He had turned failure into leverage, into negotiation power, into strategic clarity. He no longer feared downturns, he prepared for them, and preparation over time becomes advantage. But the real transformation wasn't financial, it was psychological. Failure had removed ego. And ego is expensive. Without ego, decisions become cleaner. Without ego, risk becomes measurable. Without ego, patience becomes easier. He began quietly acquiring distressed assets during market contractions, businesses that had scaled aggressively without resilience planning. He recognized the pattern instantly because he had once lived it. He didn't mock them, he understood them. And he structured deals that preserved core value while eliminating structural fragility. Over time, his portfolio grew, not explosively, steadily. And steady, compounded long enough, becomes unstoppable. People began asking how he predicted downturns so accurately. He didn't predict them, he understood them. There's a difference. Prediction is guesswork. Understanding is pattern recognition. And patterns reveal themselves clearly to those who have survived collapse. Years later, at a private finance conference, someone introduced him as the man who turned failure into a financial weapon. He didn't smile, he nodded, because that was exactly what had happened. He no longer feared losing everything, he had already survived that, and survival removes the ultimate threat. When you are no longer afraid of failure, you operate differently. You move patiently, you negotiate calmly, you invest rationally. You see what others refuse to look at. Failure had stripped him down to fundamentals, and fundamentals compound. But the real test was still coming, because markets cycle, and the next major downturn would reveal whether he had truly weaponized failure or simply recovered from it.
The downturn didn't announce itself politely. It began as whispers. A hedge fund froze withdrawals. A regional bank tightened lending. 2 overvalued tech firms quietly missed earnings. Financial media called it temporary volatility. He called it ignition, because he had seen this movie before. Liquidity dries slowly, then suddenly. Confidence erodes quietly, then publicly. He didn't panic, he prepared. Months earlier, he had increased cash reserves across his portfolio, reduced exposure to floating rate debt, negotiated flexible supplier contracts, strengthened balance sheets even when growth looked attractive. Some partners questioned him at the time. Why slow expansion now? The market is strong. He had answered simply, strength hides fragility. Now, fragility was surfacing everywhere. Within weeks, venture-backed startups began cutting staff. Private equity firms halted acquisitions. Credit markets tightened aggressively. Companies built on optimism suddenly needed oxygen. He didn't feel fear. He felt clarity. Because while others scrambled to survive, he had dry powder. And dry powder during panic is power. The first call came from a logistics tech firm drowning under variable interest loans. Revenue strong, margins decent, but debt structured for perfect conditions. Perfect conditions were gone. Their CEO sounded exhausted. We just need bridge financing, 3 months. He reviewed their books. They didn't need 3 months. They needed structural surgery. Instead of offering a loan, he proposed something radical. He would assume a portion of their debt at discount, inject controlled liquidity, replace unstable debt instruments with long-term fixed structures. In return, he would receive significant equity and governance control. It wasn't predatory, it was precise. They hesitated, but the alternative was collapse. They agreed. That pattern repeated. A manufacturing firm crippled by supply chain volatility, a fintech startup overexposed to speculative lending, a real estate group leveraged at peak valuations. He didn't rescue them emotionally, he restructured them mathematically. Where others saw chaos, he saw mispriced assets. And because he understood failure intimately, he could identify which collapses were temporary and which were terminal. That distinction made him dangerous. News outlets began using harsher language, market instability, credit stress, systemic pressure. Investors panicked. He expanded, not recklessly, selectively. He rejected dozens of opportunities. Failure had taught him another rule. Not every falling asset deserves saving. Some deserve extinction. By mid-crisis, his portfolio had doubled in asset base, but paradoxically reduced in fragility, because every acquisition eliminated structural weaknesses before integration. He standardized liquidity buffers across all companies, instituted stress test simulations quarterly, mandated conservative leverage ratios. He was building something different, not a high-growth empire, an anti-collapse empire. Then came the moment that defined everything. A major national bank, overextended in commercial real estate, quietly sought private capital. Publicly, they projected stability. Privately, they were exposed. The opportunity was massive, but so was the risk. Entering the deal would elevate him from strategic operator to systemic player. He studied their books for weeks, found the cracks, not insolvency, illiquidity, temporary if handled correctly. He structured a complex capital injection tied to strict restructuring terms, asset liquidation schedules, executive compensation adjustments, governance oversight. The deal closed quietly. When the broader crisis peaked months later, that bank survived. Competitors didn't. Suddenly, his name wasn't whispered, it was analyzed. Financial journalists called him disciplined, rivals called him opportunistic. He called himself prepared. Because here was the truth no one likes to admit. Downturns do not destroy wealth, they transfer it, from the over-leveraged to the liquid, from the emotional to the disciplined, from the fragile to the structured. He had positioned himself on the receiving end of that transfer. But the psychological shift inside him was even deeper. Years ago, failure had felt personal. Now, watching large institutions collapse, he saw something clearly. Markets do not punish people, they punish structural weakness. And once you detach ego from outcome, you see patterns coldly. During the worst quarter of the crisis, when headlines screamed recession, his net worth quietly multiplied. Not through speculation, through acquisition of discounted durability. His earlier collapse had given him immunity to panic. While CEOs lost sleep, he negotiated calmly at midnight. While boards reacted emotionally, he waited. Patience is unbearable during growth cycles. It is priceless during contractions. By the time recovery signs emerged, his portfolio controlled logistics networks, manufacturing chains, fintech rails, and partial stakes in banking infrastructure. He hadn't chased dominance, he had accumulated resilience. Investors now approached him differently. They no longer asked about rapid returns, they asked about stability models. Governments requested advisory input on crisis mitigation frameworks. He declined public spotlight repeatedly. Visibility attracts noise. Noise invites ego. Ego invites fragility. He had learned that lesson permanently. One evening, alone in his office, he opened the old spreadsheet from the company that once collapsed. He stared at the projections he once believed would make him successful. They were aggressive, ambitious, impressive, and completely fragile. He didn't feel shame, he felt gratitude, because without that collapse, he would have chased growth forever. Instead, he had built power, and power rooted in structural advantage survives cycles. But success brings new danger, complacency. He knew the next phase would test something different, not survival, scale. Could the anti-collapse philosophy function at massive size? Could discipline survive exponential growth? Or would expansion itself reintroduce fragility? History showed that empires often fall not from external attack, but internal overconfidence. He refused to repeat that pattern. So instead of accelerating uncontrollably, he did something counterintuitive. He slowed integration, strengthened governance, distributed operational authority while centralizing risk oversight. He built internal teams dedicated to identifying fragility within his own empire. Failure auditing became permanent because the weapon he forged from collapse required constant sharpening. The crisis eventually ended. Markets stabilized. Optimism returned. New startups emerged, bold and aggressive. He watched quietly. Some would learn the hard way. He already had. And that was the difference. The man who once lost everything had now positioned himself where downturns expanded him instead of shrinking him. Failure had not been erased, it had been converted into foresight, into leverage, into advantage. But power attracts attention, and attention would soon bring a different kind of threat. Not financial, political, regulatory, public. Because when you grow quietly during chaos, people start asking how.